So, I recently read a book about my zodiac sign, which is Taurus. And if you're interested in what I thought about the book, keep watching this video. Now, let me preface this by saying I really believe in respecting people's time. So, make sure you check out the description box, the captions, and just feel free to fast forward to whatever part interests you the most. But I am going to start off with a little bit of background as far as why I picked this book. So, generally, I am not a person that's into astrology, zodiac, all of that. I'm not that type of person at all. I do occasionally read horoscope just for fun, just for entertainment purposes. I probably do that if I can remember, maybe a few times a year, maybe like 2 or 3 times a year just for fun, but it's not really something that I pay attention to. I'm not going to change my life over it or something like that. I came across this book because I was in Barnes and Noble one day, maybe over a year ago, and this book was just like on a display shelf. And I said, okay, this seems interesting. And it was, this book is one of 12 books in the series. So the author makes books for every single sign, and this one just happened to be the one on display. It's my sign. So I was like, let me just look through it. It was a very short book. I actually read the Kindle version of the book, so I don't have the physical copy with me, but it's a very short, easy to read, kind of small book. So I was like, oh, this seems pretty easy, pretty harmless. I start not scamming. I start scanning through the pages. I'm like, this actually seems interesting. So I do what I always do, and I just take a picture of it. Kind of a note to myself to just come back to it later. So here we are over a year later, and I find myself getting back into reading, which is something that I have always enjoyed. Definitely near and dear to my heart, but I kind of abandoned reading, so I'm excited to get back into it, which is what prompted me wanting to do like book reviews and things of that nature, not only to hold myself accountable, other people might find it helpful, and I just think it's fun. It's just something that brings me joy. So that's kind of how I came across the book. As far as the format, like I already mentioned, this was the Kindle version. So, you can easily, if you're looking for this book, you can easily find it at your library. Definitely look up the Libby app. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you can find lots of amazing ebooks and also audiobooks through the Libby app, and it's free, so take advantage. But I just purchased this off Amazon, the Kindle version, and it was like less than $10. Okay, so let's get into it. I really enjoyed this book. Surprisingly, again, it's interesting that I even read this because it's not something I would typically read, but I've been open to stepping outside of my comfort zone a little bit lately. So I've been trying new things and just different aspects of life, new movies, TV shows, new music, whatever, just things like that, just to do it. But I like this book. I had actually just finished reading a little bit of a heavier book, and I'll definitely make a review on that one as well prior to this. So I just wanted something, that was lighter, easy to read, almost one of those like feel good books, kind of something like that. So this was a great book. Because it's such a short book, you could easily finish this book in one day. I did drag it out to 3 days. That was just on me, no particular reason. Sometimes when you're enjoying a book, you don't want it to end, so you just kind of drag it out. So it took me about 3 days to finish it. Now, I actually have my Kindle right here with me, so you're going to see me referencing it a lot and kind of looking at it, as it has all of my highlights in it. That's one, and I can make a totally different video on my Kindle and all of that because I can talk a lot about that. But one of the features that I really like about it is just being able to highlight on it. I do not highlight in physical books, but I enjoy doing that on my Kindle, so you'll see me referencing that a lot. So there were some quotes that stood out to me. There were specific sentences, so I will mention that. But I will say just the very short summary of this would be thumbs up. I do like it. I would recommend it. One thing that might be concerning to people with kind of like religious backgrounds and things of that nature is, how does that fit in with astrology? Reality is I'm not going to dive all into that in this kind of video. I'm just giving my thoughts on this book. But I do think that this book is soft and gentle enough that it won't really ruffle too many feathers if that is a concern of yours. That was something that was actually on my mind as well. But the way that she goes about writing this book, it just, in no way did I feel like it conflicted with my religion. So that's hopefully a helpful point, something for you to kind of consider with this. So one of the things that I like, clearly I wanted to adjust the lighting in the room. So she starts off each chapter with a quote from a person who's a Taurus, which I thought was just a cute little touch. So one quote that I highlighted was, "If you always do what interests you, at least one person is pleased." This is one that I've heard before by Katharine Hepburn, but I just thought it was pretty neat. That was just in the introduction, so that kind of stood out to me. Something that I enjoyed about this book, how she has, it's pretty well organized. And so like the chapters, and I'll post a photo somewhere on here, but she has the chapters really nicely organized. So it's like Taurus at work, Taurus as a child, Taurus as an adult, Taurus in love, you know. So I thought that was like a nice kind of like a way of organizing it. So that was neat. Again, overall, without spotting my highlights, my overall interpretation why I like the book is because it pointed out things in myself. A lot of the things I already knew, you know, so of course we know that Taurus are known to kind of be stubborn people, but she goes into, well, tell me things that Taurus people are typically known for, which I did know those things about myself. However, it's really nice to be able to articulate something properly. And so I think after reading this book, like if someone were to ask me, hey, you know, describe yourself to me, I would be able to do that in a little bit of a more articulate way. So that was kind of really nice. It also helped me put things in different perspectives. So sometimes we may look at something and think, oh, that's bad, but really it's not just bad, it's just different. Okay, and so there were a few different examples in the book that made me kind of think about that. I'll get into that a little bit later. So one thing that I didn't realize, you guys, was that when we talk about, you know, hey, what's your sign? Pisces, Taurus, Aries, whatever, we're specifically talking about someone's solar chart, and we're only talking about their sun sign. But there is something that's called the natal chart, and please know I'm not, you know, big into this astrology stuff, so these are just tidbits that I've gotten from the book. Do your own research, obviously, if you're interested in more in-depth information about that. But in order to know information about your natal chart and specifically find what's called your rising sign, you need to know your place of birth and your exact time of birth. So obviously your birth certificate would be a great place to start there, and you can just type it in online. You can literally just Google you know, like free natal charts and things of that nature, and you can pull yours up. It was really interesting to me because I actually found mine and it said I was a Pisces, which is something that I never thought about. I was like, what? But the interesting thing is I went to Google, and of course I had to immediately Google Pisces and see what popped up. And one of the first things that popped up, it was something that kind of stood out and was like true to me. And I was like, oh wow, very interesting. I'll have to read that. I'll read that in a moment. It was really interesting. What she says about your rising sign is, when you know your natal chart, this chart will not only confirm your sun's placement, but also determine what sign you have rising, or the sign that was coming up on Earth's eastern horizon when you were born. Your rising sign sets the layout of your completely individual natal chart. Your natal chart is unique to you, and you alone. No two will be exactly the same. The reason I like this is because initially when I hear about astrology and horoscope and things of that nature, my first thought is, how can this be, right? There are tons of people on earth, millions, billions of people. So how can you just reduce people to 1 out of 12 signs? That doesn't make sense to me. That doesn't seem individualized enough. So that was one of my like hesitations kind of going into this book. I really like how she talks about natal chart because that's a lot more personal and individualized based on what I just read. And so that is something that kind of stood out to me. And I thought, okay, that's pretty neat. I'll be very real. I don't know moving forward if this is something that I will read deeper into and things of that nature, but it definitely was an interesting read, and I don't regret reading it, and I could recommend this book to you. Okay, so we're gonna find another highlight. Something else that kind of stood out to me, you guys, and I have seen this, again, I don't really watch I do not watch horoscope videos and things of that, like on YouTube and whatever, but I have seen them like pop up. And so sometimes little snippets, like little 10 seconds, I'll hear little words and things like that. And they're talking about, you know, Venus and retrograde and all of that. And so one thing that found really interesting, and I'll just read this out word for word, pay close attention to when your favorite astrologer discusses Venus changing from one sign into another, which happens about every 3.5 weeks, especially when Venus retrogrades, which is once every 18 months to last approximately 6 weeks. Mark these dates on your calendar as they will be periods in which you're especially sensitive to the energetic shifts at play. With Venus retrograde, you'll want to note that it is not a good time to launch a business or something you hope to be financially fruitful, or for anything beauty related. Think cosmetic surgery or drastic changes to your appearance. That was interesting. I've heard those words, about Venus retrograde. I've heard of things like that before, but it's really interesting to me. It's not even so much something I necessarily believe or don't believe, but I can't say it's not boring to me. I do find it interesting. Realistically, I don't know if this is something that I would be committed to actually paying attention to regularly in my life, marking calendar dates out. But I could see myself almost doing like a mini experiment and just trying it once and just seeing if that kind of makes any difference. But truly, it's not something that I'm going to actually change my life around. I really just read this book, you guys, just out of like curiosity, just out of just interest, just to read something different from what I would normally read. Let's keep going. So in the chapter where she talks about Taurus as a child, one of the things that I highlighted was the child whose sun or rising sign is in Taurus is sensitive to their surroundings, as Taurus is the most sensual and sensory oriented sign of the zodiac. That could not ring more true for me. I definitely consider myself a very sensual person. When she says sensory oriented sign of the zodiac, that was something that kind of gave me a little pause, because I never considered myself a very sensory oriented person, but I definitely consider myself a very sensual person. Maybe the two go hand in hand. Maybe you say, well, duh, those essentially mean the same thing. I don't know, but that was just kind of interesting to me. However, when I think about the five senses, and I have a best friend that she would always make fun of me about how I would have tendencies to just like put things in my mouth. And I think it's because I just liked how things felt. I liked the texture of things. I thought it was cool. I can remember being in stores and just like randomly touching the walls or randomly touching objects. And it was never something that I paid attention to. But here in this book, Courtney is saying, we are the most sensory oriented sign. So I'm like, I guess that would explain that. And I had a lot of those moments in this book. This is the reason that I like the book, because I did have a lot of moments where I would just say, that makes sense. I didn't think about that, but sure, that makes sense. That kind of aligns with me. With anything, you guys, with any book, I always say, just take what you need. It doesn't have to be everything. You don't have to agree with every single thing in a book, because you have to remember the book was written by a person or people, but essentially the book was written by a human being, right? So a human naturally has opinions, have biases and things of that nature. So you never have to agree with 100% or even 90% of something that you get out of a book. And just because you don't agree with 100% of it doesn't mean that it's a bad book. So just something to kind of keep in mind. I'm going a little bit backwards because now I'm trying to go in order, but one thing that I forgot to mention was, excuse me. She mentions, she does touch on kind of religion, just a smidge, only for like one paragraph in the book. And one thing that I like was, she says how you really don't want to look at astrology as something that you either believe in or don't believe in. Don't see it as in conflict to a religion. See it as a tool that can be helpful in addition to what other beliefs you have. For example, she likes to compare astrology in a way almost to the weather, in the sense of no one really says, I believe in the weather or I don't believe in the weather. I have never heard anyone say that in life. However, if you pay attention to what the weather says, if it says it's going to rain tomorrow, you can choose to bring an umbrella because you're aware that it will probably rain, or you can choose to not bring an umbrella. And if you do bring an umbrella, obviously you will be covered. If you don't, we all know it's going to happen. So she kind of compares that to astrology in the sense of just use it as a tool to kind of gather more information, and then you can do whatever you want with that information. So I thought that was really interesting, and that was very helpful and kind of like soothing. I don't know if soothing is the best word. I can't think of the best word in this moment, but it was nice and a sense of peace doing that, because that is a kind of a conflict that I had with this book, or with anything that's astrology, zodiac sign, all of that kind of related topics. So I thought that was interesting. That was definitely an interesting point. Let us continue. Seguimos. Okay, so another part that I highlighted, she was saying, this is one of a Taurus's greatest skills, combining their talents with their above average diligence to achieve a level of excellence through consistent effort, which inspires others around them to do the same. Now, some of this may sound very generalized, but I definitely identify with this because I do consider myself a very diligent person. People around me would definitely describe me as kind of this go-getter and a very, very, very ambitious person. And so in areas that I've been successful in life, it's not so much that I am the most talented, even though I certainly don't think I have zero talent, but it's not even about that. It's because of how diligent I am. When I set my mind to something, it is set. It's not going to easily change, and that's something she talks about as well, of course, in the book, that for a lot of us Taurus people, it may take us a while to make a decision. And so this is what I was saying earlier about good versus bad. Other people may interpret that as that's a bad thing, that it's taking you so long to make a decision. Come on, make a decision, right? But it's not necessarily bad. It's just a different perspective because we're very thorough. We're very, very thorough. We're considering all of the what ifs. We are considering everything, the plan A, B, C, D, all the way to Z. So that was something I found interesting in the book. I do consider myself quite a diligent person, so that was something that I related to. I like that. So in the section where it's Taurus as a parent, she talks about, one thing I highlighted was, nature is another prime outlet for the Taurus parent, as the sign rules the center of spring. This is very interesting to me because it wasn't something that I just consciously thought about, but if you ask people around me and things of that nature, I always say how the park is my happy place. For a lot of people, they enjoy going to the beach, mountains, whatever the case may be. For me, it's the park. I really enjoy being in the park. And so it kind of makes sense with some of the things that I was reading in the book. So this also stood out to me. I like being in nature. I like, not to the point of camping every weekend or something like that. Not to that point, but just being in a park is so much a happy place for me. And so some of the points that she mentioned, it just made me think, that explains that. That explains this. It makes so much sense. Then in the section of the book where she was talking about Taurus and love, I really like it because she compares Taurus to every other sign. So there's a paragraph on Taurus with Sagittarius. There's a paragraph on Taurus with Pisces, etc. So in the section with Scorpio, I was curious to just read about Scorpio. Not even for necessarily romantic purposes, but just because I have a very, my sibling is Scorpio. And so we are very, very close. So I was just curious to see what she had to say about that. And so one thing that I'll read the last paragraph in it. Scorpios approach a situation by using their intuition and emotional intelligence as a result of their water influence, whereas Taureans take a more logical and grounded approach because of their earthy qualities. And that was interesting to me because I actually do consider myself a person that I do use some level of definitely intuition when it comes to decision making. So it's interesting that she's put that with Scorpios, but she says Taurians take a more, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, that we take a more logical and grounded approach, and I definitely agree with that. I do consider myself a pretty logical person. Of course, I can be emotional. Absolutely, I can be. I have been. That's fine. But I think overall, I am definitely a more logical person, and I love that about myself. and also pretty grounded. That's one thing that she emphasizes about us Taureans, and I couldn't agree with that more. Very grounded. She didn't use the word predictable. I'm kind of using predictable, not in a bad way or a boring way, but in predictable actually isn't the best word. Stable. That's the word I'm looking for. Stability. And she talks about how stability is very important to Taureans. Could not agree with that more. Read the book. If this is interesting to you guys, just read the book. It's a short read. You can be done with it in one day. These are just things that kind of stood out to me. Something else that was interesting, she talked about Sagittarius, so I'm just going to read this sentence. Sagittarians are freedom-loving and changeable, and their untethered nature can feel unsettling for a Taurus, whereas a Taurus's set ways and inflexibility can feel a bit too prohibitive for a Sagittarius. Now, in this part, I got annoyed because she's calling me, inflexible. However, there's a lot of truth to that. It has been said to me more than once that, oh, you don't really like change. You don't seem to do well with change. And it's not that I am so inflexible that I won't change, but perhaps I could just describe it better as I'm not quick to change, and she does address that in other parts of the book as well. For myself, if I know that something is going well and working for me, I'm going to stick to that. So I do tend to go on the side that says if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I do tend to agree with that for the most part. However, I'm not so stubborn that if you present something to me and I realize it's for the better, I realize that I come to that conclusion, of course I will change for the better. So that's definitely not an issue for me. But I actually know quite a few people in life that are I love how she describes it, fun, loving, and changeable. That's a great way to put it, because I would have described it in a way that maybe would have sounded like more negative. People that are also like overly spontaneous and things like that, that does not work for my life. And it's really funny because I recently had this conversation with actually two people. And so it was so interesting to me. The funny thing is, one of those people that I had a conversation with, I did not know that this person was a Sagittarius. And we were on the phone and I just randomly said, by the way, are you a Sagittarius? And the response was yes. I'm like, aha, bingo. I knew it, because this describes that person like absolutely, to the T. This really does. So I thought that was super interesting. I do tend to have more set ways. I just do. It's a fact. I do tend to have more set ways. And so I can see how maybe that comes across as prohibitive to people. When it comes to like the adventurous and spontaneous side of things, I do consider myself adventurous for sure. Adventurous and spontaneous to me they're not one and the same. They can be similar, but they're not one and the same. There's a difference. I like a good mix. So I do like things to kind of be like set, planned, and things of that nature. But I do also appreciate a degree of spontaneity. So I just like a mix. But people who are extremely spontaneous, that does feel, and I'm going to use the word that she described. She said it feels unsettling, and that's a great way to describe it. And that's what I'm talking about. There were so many moments in the book where I just feel like, oh, that's a good way to say that. That's a good way to describe that. It's things I've always known in my head, but to like see it written in words, it just helps to clearly define things, and it helps me to be able to describe myself to myself and to others. So that's probably like the biggest thing from the book. So I really like that. Seguimos. Let's keep going. So a part about Capricorn, and at first I was like, why did I highlight Capricorn? I don't, but I understand why. So I'll read this sentence. This is with Taurus and Capricorn. Taurus admires Capricorn's tenacity and hardworking nature. Their ability to set a goal with practical steps to achieve it is a real turn on for Taurus, where Capricorn's sometimes doubtful nature appreciates Taurus's tender heart, honesty, and encouragement to stay the course. And I love that. That really stood out to me. That's absolutely true for me. The hardworking thing, I do consider myself a pretty ambitious, hardworking person. And so to see that in like someone else, that is absolutely a turn on. So she is spot on in the love department in that chapter of the book, Taurus and Love. Setting a goal with practical steps. So she's describing that as something that Capricorns typically do. I don't know. I'm not a Capricorn. I don't think I know too many Capricorns. So you can let me know if that's true, if you're a Capricorn or know something about Capricorns. But I see that in my own self, setting a goal with practical steps. I am very, very, very goal oriented, and that is a part of how I do it. Is I chop down my goals into small, manageable pieces, in practical steps. So I really like that as well. Let's keep going. What else did I highlight in here? There's a kind, admirable simplicity to a Taurus's affection. It's warm, sensual, and unwavering. It may take Taurians a while to decide you're the one for them, true, but don't take offense. This is because they are careful. They are not likely to rush into something or make rash decisions about the gift of their affection. But once they decide, they are all in. Very accurate. There's not much else for me to say to that, just very accurate. Also, once they've decided you're the one for them, they become deeply invested and will do almost anything for you. To be clear, they expect the same kind of loyalty and commitment in return and don't handle a breach or lack of it well. Enough said. There's nothing for me to add to that. That's exactly spot on. So something else that she mentions, this is in the Taurus at Work chapter. Taurus is a security-centered sign. Change is not their favorite thing in the world, as it may threaten to rock the boat of their precious stability. They like to know where their paycheck is coming from, how much, and how frequently. You guys, that is very spot on. When I was in high school, there was a job that was kind of commission based. It involved almost like cold calling. Think of like door-to-door sales, something like that. And it was my second or I'm pretty sure it's my third day, and I quit. Things of that nature, you guys, that doesn't work well for me. Stability is extremely important to me, and I've always been the person I would rather take, if I have two potential jobs and I know that one is going to be consistent paychecks, XYZ amount every so often, the other one is a little bit more inconsistent, but the potential to make more is there. I would rather take the one making a little bit less. Notice I said a little bit less, because what it comes with is priceless to me. What it comes with is security, and that is extremely important to me. So I could not agree with that more. In the book, she does go into like some professions that might be a little bit more for Taurus people, and so I thought that was kind of interesting as well. But the idea of, she says we're a security oriented sign. Never did I think about it in terms of that, but I couldn't agree with it more. Yeah, so simple sentence, but she says taking big risks regularly in their business affairs is not for them. And that is very true. I'm not into that. I don't support that. Not for me. I just don't. Security is way more important because I can plan with that. If I know this is exactly what I have in front of me, this is exactly what I have to deal with, I'm able to properly plan for that, and my chances of being successful are much greater and actually achievable. So could not agree with that better. So here's something else in the same Taurus at Work section. Taurus employees are diligent and will accomplish every task asked of them, but once they find their routine, they won't appreciate it being changed much. Absolutely. Once I'm in the groove of things, rocking the boat and changing things that's not a comfortable space for me at all. Even right now, I work in education, and the district that I work for, there are so many changes and things of that going on, and it is a very unsettling thing. Not just for me, for so many people, because educators are like leaving, they are flocking out. But that's very true about change. And so she says it's true they can be stubborn and set in their ways. If it works, why change it? It's unlikely they will be persuaded to change easily. It has to be their idea. So provide them with clear-cut facts and a little time, and they'll soon come around. And I could not agree with that more. That's what I was saying earlier. When it comes to change, convince me, give me the facts, and you don't just convince me with logic and facts and research, science, and all that good stuff. Convince me with real material so that I can see it for myself. Oh, there's a benefit to changing, and then it's done. That's not an issue. So yes, I do tend to be stuck in my ways, and this book also, it provided a lot for me to like reflect on. And it's interesting because that was in the book as well, that Taurus people tend to be very introspective. Word I'm looking for, yes, and that's extremely true for me. So I thought that was pretty neat. Let's keep going. This was the Taurus in school section, and one line that I highlighted was, once they decide on an area of study, they are sure to do well, as their qualities of endurance mean they stick to what they start. No, that is the truth. And this is reflected in so many different areas of my life, not just school. Sticking to what I start. So again, go back to what was said already. Yes, it may take me a little bit longer to decide to start on something or to decide what to start, but once I do it, I'm sticking with it. For example, even this video, I was committed to getting this video done, at least getting the video recorded before I start. This is a simple example, before starting a new book, which is so painful for me because I'm itching. I have such a deep itch to start a new book, but I can't do it until I finish this, so it's very important for me to finish what I have started. That's very, very important to me. And again, you guys, I'm going to always say, take what is for you and leave what is not for you. So you may sit here and say, oh, come on, that describes like everybody. I know other people that are not Tauruses that this is true for. Certainly. Of course, that could certainly be the case. Why not? For myself, these are just the reasons. These are just part of the reasons that I like the book. These are specific things that I highlighted that just kind of like stood out to me. Something else, this was more for my own self, but I'll just read it out loud. She said, in addition to your sun sign, you'll want to look to Mercury, as Mercury's sign and placement offer insight into your communication style as well as how you digest information. That was interesting to me. I've never heard of that before. I highlighted that just as something for me to kind of look more into. And I know I said I wasn't really going to dive too much deeper into this, but excuse me. It's purely out of curiosity. Take it or leave it. It's just something that stood out to me. I don't think I mentioned it, but she did mention that Venus is a planet that rules Taurus. So she goes back and references Venus a lot kind of throughout the book. So this next part, she was talking about Taurus fashion, and she said their aesthetic won't be the flashiest at the party, but it will be flattering and likely to prompt guests to say, that's gorgeous, where did you find it? Taureans have a natural, undeniable allure, and with Venus, the planet of love and grace, as their ruler, it makes sense. Couldn't agree with that more. I couldn't agree with that more. I am not going, and not just in terms of fashion, not just what I'm wearing, but in my personality as well. If you're looking for like necessarily who's going to be the loudest at the party and the flashiest, both literally and figuratively, it's not going to be me. So I agree with that. However, she says flattering and likely to prompt guests to say it's gorgeous. So I like that. And to me, that just goes a little bit deeper than just what you're wearing, even though this was in the fashion section of the book. But I like that. That line stood out to me. And so that is something I certainly can identify with. This kind of helped me think about my relations with other people. And I'm not, whether romantically, platonically, whatever, it kind of just gave me something to think about in terms of how I relate to other people. So that was pretty neat. So when talking to, there's a part in here where she talks about yin and yang. This is not something I'm very familiar with at all, but she says yin energy is related to more inward turning, reflective, and related to the manifestation of growth of our ideas, which goes with negative and feminine signs. And then yang, she talks about thought and action oriented and more outwardly expressive. I've never heard of that before because I'm not into this yin yang stuff. However, the inward turning, reflective, related to manifestation of growth of our ideas is something that's very near and dear to me. And so she says Taurus is the first of this negative feminine sign, which she refers to as yin energy, and it's fertile ground for growth once we have an idea of what we're after. It's the Taurus side of ourselves that conspires to manifest our inner thoughts into an actual reality. That was neat. I like that. It stood out to me. In this section of the book, she was talking about Taurus and like social settings. And she said, while Taureans are perhaps quieter than other signs, when they do share, it's clear and thought out and usually makes a lot of sense. That is very true. I've always simply described myself kind of to other people because I feel like it's just easier for them to understand as more of an introvert. I think as I've gotten older, I've become a slightly bit more extroverted introvert, but nonetheless an introvert at heart and a proud introvert too. But I like how she's saying this, how she describes it, because it's a little bit more concrete, right? And so it's not that I don't have anything to say or that I'm so shy. Sometimes I could be shy in situations, but that's not just like the default of, oh, I'm just a shy person. I am in my head, not in a bad way, but I am in my head taking in information, observing, reaching different conclusions in my head. And I like to speak on things once I know that I know that I know, instead of just speaking just like that. You know, so when she says it's clear and thought out and usually makes a lot of sense, that's absolutely how I am. And I've noticed that about myself when I'm maybe like in meetings at work or something like that. I make sure that when I speak, I actually have something to say. She says also, common sense is not something Taurians lack. Their nature is practical, sensible, and to the point. There won't be a lot of fluff encasing what they have to say. And that's right. Let's get to the point. Let's just get to it. It's very practical. But I've always described myself as a very practical person. And I know I'm going back and forth, but even when it comes to like gift giving and things of that nature, I'm such a practical person, right? Sometimes people may laugh at the idea of like gifting someone like a phone charger, but I will take it graciously. I find that a very practical gift. Please bring me the phone charger, as opposed to just something else that, I don't know, a simple example could be flowers. Not to say that I don't like flowers, but you don't have to like get to know me to get me flowers, right? So something that's just more practical that I could actually use, that's kind of functional, is very, very meaningful to me. Practical, sensible, to the point. Those are great adjectives to describe myself, I think. So I love it. She makes mentions about they'll go weak at the allure of your floral perfume or home-cooked meal, and can have a spiritual experience listening to their favorite song in the car. That last part is true. I'm sure a lot of different people and signs can identify with that. It's not real. Again, the whole part about being very like sensory oriented, that's something that's news to me. I didn't really think about that, but when I think about specific examples in my life, it does actually make sense. That is something that I do pay attention to, but I think just subconsciously. So it does make sense a lot what she's saying about, being very sensory oriented. She mentioned something in the book that someone else had mentioned. She says, as Lisa Goodman hilariously said of Taurus in her best-selling book, Sun Signs, flat hamburgers and bland pea soup leave her emotionally cold. It's just par for the course. Those Taurian senses are heightened for better or worse. One thing I can say is, even when I'm like cooking for myself, I will go out of the way to make it look nice, pretty, decorative, and more appealing to my senses, just because. Not for any particular reason, just because it's just more pleasurable to me overall like that. So that does make sense. And she says, this with that quote, bland soup leaves her emotionally cold. That was hilarious to me. And I like that. I'm going to kind of steal that and start using that to describe things. But I never consciously thought about it, but now that it's brought to my attention, I think when things are less sensory appealing, am I saying that properly? It does seem to leave me a bit emotionally cold. So that was just a very interesting way to describe it. I like that. She says those Taurian senses are heightened for better or worse. That's correct. That's correct. This sign, Taurus, along with its ruling planet Venus, teaches us to plan thoughtfully in the now so that we may build a nest egg for the future, and of course to submerge ourselves fully in the sensory delights the world has to offer. Heard you, Miss Courtney. Heard you there. She also talks about, Taurians do what they say they're going to do. Their follow through is strong, and that is true. That's why I have to be mindful about making commitments, because if I say I'm going to do something, especially now that I'm older, if I say I'm going to do it, it takes integrity to actually do what you say you're going to do, no matter how big or how small. And that's very accurate. My follow through is strong. There is a strong follow through. If I say I'm going to do something, it's done. It's done. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. I kind of mentioned it, and I'll read it word for word what she says. Some confuse, she's talking about astrology and religion. So some confuse astrology with a belief system or think of astrology as a religion in and of itself, but that is not the case. Astrology, in fact, has the capacity to enhance those things. It does not negate them. And this is the weather part I was saying. I'll just read it. I'll read hers word for word. I like to say it's a bit like the weather. You don't believe in the weather, it just is. You can plan for the weather or not. Either way, it will be there. Astrology is a tool, accessible tool to all, so why not add it to your tool belt and plan for success? At the very least, it may help you navigate times of discord with a little more ease. And I do like that, because it kind of gives you choice. You can use it or you can not use it. You don't have to use it. There's no pressure to have astrology in your tool belt. But anything that can help you navigate times of hardness, times of unpleasantness with a little bit more ease, I always think it's worth it. So if for you that's astrology, that's fine. If for you it's getting your nails done, getting your hair done, whatever, that's fine. If it is, whatever, if it's working out, it's fine. Whatever helps you to navigate those tough times a little bit easier, go for it. Who am I to stop you? So I like that approach. I really appreciate her kind of saying that in the book. That I really appreciated that. A part that I like that was cool, she had a section in the back of the book where she will list other famous people that are also Taurus. And so that was kind of cool. I just randomly highlighted Malcolm X. I didn't know he was Taurus, but there's a whole list of people. That was awesome. Coretta Scott King, Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald. So there's a long list. So that was pretty cool. After reading this book, here's something that's really funny. I started to think about people and like famous people, and I was like, you know what, I bet this person is a Taurus. And I literally would Google them and they're a Taurus. One specific person was what's her name, Megan Fox. I find her very sensual. Her sex appeal is very strong. And so according to this book, it makes sense for a Taurus because our ruling planet is Venus. Very sensual. We are the most sensual of the zodiac signs. And I was like, you know what? It would be hilarious if she's actually a Taurus. I go on Google to look up her birthday. She's definitely a Taurus. So I just kind of found that like funny, ironic. Again, I cannot emphasize enough, this stuff is more so just interesting to me. I'm not going to change careers and become an astrologer or anything like that. It was just very interesting to me. Double Taurus, which it makes sense. I didn't think about it, but someone who's a double Taurus is just a person that their sun sign is a Taurus and their rising sign is a Taurus. So they're extra true to the qualities of their sign. If you are a double Taurus, and again, you would need to know your place of birth and your time of birth to know that. This might be especially interesting for you to read this book. Yeah, that would be kind of cool for someone to be whatever their sign is, like even Aries, whatever, for your sun sign to be the same as your rising sign. That would be super interesting. A quote that I really liked, this came from The Rock. She says, I didn't know that he was also a Taurus. His birthday is May 2nd. Success isn't always about greatness. It's about consistency. Consistent hard work leads to success. Greatness will come. And I really like that greatness will come because it just sounds like you're destined for greatness, right? So even if you're being consistent at something that that's good for you, right? If you're being consistent, you cannot fail. Even if you tried to fail, but yet you're being consistent, you couldn't happen. It would be impossible to. So that quote just kind of made me think about that, and I really like it. She talks about astrology right at the end, and she says, it broadens our view, enables to see a situation from a new angle, and is a source of great compassion as it increases our empathy for not only our own situation, but also the situations of the people around us, as well as offering invaluable insight into current events. I love that, and that's definitely a part of just the overall grasp of what I got from this book. Just because people are different from me, just because someone is always spontaneous and they never give me notice about things to do, and it's just like, let's just do it in the moment, I could find that like as annoying or disrespectful to my time. But in reality, they're just maybe like fun loving or kind of something like that. And it's beneficial for us to still be in each other's company because they can learn things from me and I can also learn things from them. So the part about just looking at things from a new angle, that's very important to me. And I really like that. It stood out to me. And then right at the end, the very last quote, she said, as the spiritual teacher Ram Dass said, we're all just walking each other home. I really like that. That's cute to me. I think that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. It's really neat. It's kind of this idea of just, we're all just kind of doing the same thing in a different way, but it affects everybody else. We're all kind of intertwined, and we all sort of have like the same kind of like end goal to get home. And that's what we're doing with other humans, with other people. We're just walking each other home. That's beautiful to me. That's actually really beautiful. So that's kind of my overall thoughts on the book. Those are a few things that I highlighted in my Kindle that I wanted to share on this video. If I had anything negative, only thing I could think to say negative, maybe, there were a few parts, not a lot, that really bothered me, but I guess if I'm forced to say something negative, there were some parts where she kind of like repeated herself. And I remember reading I was midway through the book and I was like, wait, I just read that earlier in the book, or I read it at the end of the book. And I'm like, I could have sworn I read that same sentence earlier. So there were a few things that were repeated, which might bother some people. However, for me, because I'm a total beginner at all of this astrology and zodiac stuff, I actually found that helpful, like reinforcing things about Venus and natal chart and things like that. That was helpful for me because I've never read that anywhere else. So all in all, I definitely give this book a thumbs up. I recommend it. I don't know if it's something I would read again. Actually, I probably could see myself reading this book again at some point in my life. Again, just because so much of what she says I do identify with, and I see that in my own self. So it's a great way to just like articulate that. But thank you so much for watching. This was actually a little bit longer than I anticipated it being. I do plan on making other reviews for books that I'm reading. I'm super excited because there are actually 5 books that I finished this year already, and that's huge for me because like I said, at the beginning of the video, I had abandoned reading at some point. But thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Let me know if you'd like to see more like this. I do hope so, and I will chat with you next time.